Part 6 completes the oil fill, then shows using the GS911 to scan and clear faults and reset the service reminder. Then some final thoughts about using the shop aids to complete panel installation. Thanks for watching. It was a lot of fun, and until next time. Now, while we're over here on this side, I want to go ahead and put engine oil in here. We'd put a reminder tape up here on the throttle so that we didn't start the engine with no engine oil in it. So on the bottom side of your seat is the tool for opening the oil filler cap. It's a unique BMW tool. The fill mark, the sight ring, is anything is acceptable from the lower part of the red circle to the upper part of the red circle. So the service level is between lower red circle and upper red circle, but that's only after running at normal operating temperature, and bring your bike to a stop, put it on the center stand, and wait for 5 minutes for all the oil to return to the sump. So now we're putting in new 5W40 oil. One more thing about whatever oil you choose, it doesn't have to be BMW oil, but just make sure that it conforms to the JASO MA2 spec. That ensures that the lubricity, the fluid, is not going to cause problems with the wet multi-plate clutch that's in the wet heads that we have today. If you have a cam head or a hex head, the older style engines where it has a dry plate clutch and a detached separate transmission, it's not an issue. The oil that you put in the engine has nothing to do with the clutch or the gearbox. With this integrated gearbox and wet multi-plate clutch, the oil has to lubricate all the gears and the clutch at the same time, so it must comply with the JASO MA2 spec. What we've done here is, these are all 1 liter containers. If you buy a 1 gallon jug, that equates to 3.8 liters, and that's the normal fill capacity. So this one needs to be 200 milliliters short for the right capacity. It goes above the sight window when you start the engine cold, when it looks like it's overfilled right now, but we haven't filled the oil galleries. There's a certain amount of oil that stays up inside the head covers. The oil filter needs to be filled, so you can't go by a sight window on an oil change. You have to do the correct quantity and then check the engine oil after normal running and standing on the center stand for 5 minutes. And this goes back in your seat so that you can use it again later. Plug, we need to go into the computer on the bike and reset the service interval and check for any other faults in the diagnostic systems that follow the bike. Okay, so now that we've hooked up the GS911 again, after we did the brake bleed, we disconnected it. So the first thing we're going to do is switch on the ignition, and now this will link up with the bike. We've chosen that it's a 1200 RT liquid cooled, and we need to go down here to auto scan. The first thing we're going to do is scan all the systems, perform an auto scan. It's reading all the controllers that are on the CAN bus, checking for any previous faults that are present or faults that are not present now. Here's the motorcycle information, the date, the mileage. Here's the audio controller. The important thing that I'm trying to get to is this has a fault code. The Sirius aerial has a short circuit. The fault is not present now. This is a very common fault, and I think it has to do with some kind of a startup sequence. I've seen it on just about every bike I've worked on that has this fault, and I don't have a problem with the Sirius radio after that. So we go to the next controller, no faults code, no faults found. The next controller, tank switch error, the fault is not present now. So there's nothing I can find out about this one, so we go to the next controller. Read at the bottom of every one of them, no fault codes found. Another controller, no faults. There's the pressure sensors, no faults. The BCL controller, no faults, the ABS controller, no faults, the combi controller, one fault, line bus message missing from the audio operating console. The fault is not present now. This may have been because we had the audio panel disconnected and power may have gone on when we were doing something, so it missed the panel, it didn't check in, so it's not present now. You have to use some logic to figure out sometimes oil level sensor too low. Well, that was because we turned on the GS911 and it monitored when we were doing the brake bleeding, the oil was empty. So you have to use some logic to determine why some of the faults are logged or not. So we're going to go up here and clear all the fault codes because we reviewed them and we understand what they are, and we can clear them knowing how we interacted with the bike previously. All fault codes are cleared. So we get down here, audio. I'm looking for no faults found on every one of the controllers. No fault. No fault code. 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 And no fault. No fault on all the rest of them. So everything is clear. Now what you want to do is go into your special functions and go into service reminder. So the service reminder now sets, it shows your current motorcycle information, how many kilometers and what the current date is, and it automatically wants to go to 365 days and 10,000 kilometers. You can choose a custom date or mileage if you'd like. If you automatically choose to let it go forward, you just click the tab and now it automatically resets the next service reminder. Next service is due. It shows you how many kilometers and what the date is that the next service is due. You can also go in and choose a custom date and mileage if you'd like. So either one of those does the same thing. And when you're done with this, it says after changing the service reminder, cycle ignition to update the cluster display so that you won't have the little key symbol with the service word next to it on your display. So there are some other things you can do in the GS911, but that's not the subject of this video. We're only talking about doing the 12,000 miles or 20K service on a bike. Just going through as an example of what we do on a bike. And I'm not going to go through all the modules. The GS911 is an incredible tool and you can manipulate so much on the bike and learn about what's going on the bike, but that's not the subject of this whole video in the first place. So everything is done on this service and we're just ready to button up and put the bike on the road at this point. So now it's time to put on the engine fairings, and on the right hand side it only has two fasteners. This center one right above the oil cap goes into a rubber grommet right here. So I find it a lot easier to place, get your finger back in behind and back up that rubber grommet as you seat that grommet first. If you seat the pin in the grommet and it's supported on that, if you try and put the screws in first and then shove the pin in, there's a high likelihood that you'll displace the rubber grommet and it won't be connected to the upper panel correctly at all. So this one up here has two layers of plastic on it. There's the gold plastic behind here and the black plastic. So logic tells me that that's going to be one of the long screws. And on our storyboard here, the shop aid, on the right hand side, it only shows us there's two screws. On the left hand side, there's three screws. So we know that the grommet is on this one. The top one says takes 17.5, and so it's going to go in here. And the bottom one is the 14.5. So this was the one oddball screw that we had from another location that is an orphan. We replaced it with the correct shouldered 14.5. So all the storyboards are now empty. There's no more screws in any of them. and we have high confidence that all the panels have the correct number of screws in the correct locations and that the bike is actually put back together correctly.